In this video, we will see the things that we need to know to prepare our palette. This is the actual first step that we have to do every time we decide to start a new painting. Here, we're going to see how and why we have to thin our oil colors down. We're going to do some experiment by mixing primary and secondary colors to see how the theory not always works when it comes to oil paints. And at the end, we're going to see how to preserve our oils by getting dry between two painting sessions. The first step to prepare our palette is, of course, choosing the colors and the quantities that we're going to use. To do this, we must have a good idea of what we are going to represent and how we're going to carry it out. We will see how to take these decisions later, case by case, when we will start painting. For now, we will only focus on what we have to do by the technical point of view. To start, we need to open our tubes and squeeze some color on our palette. Normally, they appear to be pretty thick, and for what we have to do, colors so thick are very difficult to use, so as first step, we're going to thin them down. If we try to use them as they get out from the tubes, our paint will be very sticky and it will be really difficult for us to paint. The brush will not run on the support in a proper way, releasing the color gradually in the way we actually want. But before we start pouring oil down, we want to press them with a clean brush against the palette. In this way, first, when we'll spill our medium on them and we will start mixing, they won't go around on our palette. And second, by pressing them, we will break the internal tensions that naturally get formed after some time inside the tube. This will make our job much easier. Once we have pressed all our paints, we're gonna spill some drops of medium on one of them. And with the same brush we have used for pressing, we will start mixing it. Let's try, while we do this job, to push as much as possible the paint at the center of the color stain. In this way, the stain itself it won't become too large, and we will save room on the palette for the other colors. Normally, for this job, we want to use different brushes from those that we use for painting, because after some time they're gonna change their shape, and it will be really difficult for us using them to do our works. We will see later how to choose and use brushes. We have to repeat this job for all the other colors we have on our palette. Now, if we compare the palette before and after we have diluted our oils, we can see that at the end our colors are spread on a larger area than before. So, as first, we have to start by placing our paints far from each other, so that at the end we are not going to mix them. In case we need to use many colors, we can always use more than one palette. In alternative, if we want to optimize the position, we can use a different support to thin our colors down separately and move them one by one on our palette once they are ready. For example, we can use another palette or a glass plate. In this way, we don't have to be afraid about the space we need to do our job. But on the other side, this will take more time and we will have to clean very carefully the support before we're going to work on a new color. It sounds like a big job preparing our palette, but as I said, it's the first step to start a new work. And preparing a good palette will make our life much easier later when we will start painting. Since I've started teaching, I've noticed that almost all my students want to start painting immediately and they would like to skip the palette job. Sooner or later, all of them are gonna make a poor job on the palette and they always regret it. So make peace with it because, like it or not, it's something that we need to do. And we have to do it properly to be sure that our oils are going to have always the right consistency. A natural question when we prepare our colors is, how do I know when I shall stop adding oil on my paints? There are a few things that we have to consider when we start pouring medium on our colors. First, if we dilute our paint too much, the color becomes more transparent and its polymerization gets longer. On the other side, it will be much easier to blend it with other colors. If the paint we prepare is too thick, the color remains more opaque and its polymerization will be faster. But as we said, for what we have to do, lean paints are more difficult to work. So, the answer is always the same. We should thin our colors as less as possible as far as we can work them in the way we want. At the end, it's just a matter of experience. There are no fixed rules. There's also a second and more serious problem that we have to consider when we prepare our palette. We have seen when we have talked about chemistry that if we overlap two or more layers of paint, if the bottom layer has a slower polymerization than the top layer, there is the chance that the top layer will crack. We have seen that there are a few things that we should consider in order to avoid this problem. And the most important is always to thin the top layer more than the bottom layer. We're going to see an example now on how to prepare our palette. This is just a demonstration, so we're going to pick some pigment that will allow us to see the problems we can get in if we don't know very well the colors we use. Let's start by squeezing on our palette this permanent light red, which is a semi-transparent pigment. We're going to do the same thing with this light lemon yellow, which is a transparent pigment, and with this light primary blue that it's also transparent. We're gonna start by pressing the three paints against the palette by using a clean brush for each color and leave the brush on the color. Then we're gonna spill some linseed oil on the yellow, and with the same brush we have used for press it, we are going to mix them. We will keep mixing until the paint reaches the consistency that we want and it's nice and uniform. We're going to do the same thing with the red. First we're going to pour some oil down and then we will mix them. And we're going to do the same thing with the blue. Now that the three primary colors are ready, we're going to see what happens when we mix them. Using a couple of spatulas, we are going to move some yellow first beside the red and then in an empty area right beside. Now, we're going to move some red first in an empty area beside the blue, and after that we're going to put some of it right on top of the yellow. As last, we're going to move the blue first on the yellow and then where we have the red. By mixing these pigments, we should theoretically get the secondary colors. Let's start from the red and the yellow. By blending this light red with the light yellow, we should be able to get a nice and light orange. It didn't really come out as we were thinking. It looks like the yellow almost disappeared. We're going to try to get a light orange anyway, so we're going to add some extra yellow, and this time we're going to increase the quantity. We can start to see the difference, even if with the quantity of yellow that we have used, it should look more like a dark yellow now or a light orange. As we said when we have talked about pigments and oil paints, this happened because the most opaque pigment dominates the less opaque. So in this case, the transparent yellow has been almost absorbed by the semi-transparent red. Let's work now on the yellow and blue. They're both light colors, so also in this case, theoretically, we should be able to get a light green. This time the green is actually the color that we were expecting. In fact, since they are both transparent pigments, neither of them is gonna dominate the other. For what we have just seen, if we mix this red and this blue, the red should be stronger, and we should expect to get a color more like a purple red than a magenta. But actually now we've got a surprise. We've got this dark gray. There are two possible explanations to this problem. The first, which is also the most probable, is that since this is a very light red, at least red is how the company who produced it call it, this red is so light that it's actually more like a dark orange, which is a secondary color, and the blue is its complementary. Now, we have seen already that if we mix two complementary colors, we get a tertiary color, which by our definition are black, brown, and in this case, gray. The other reason why this could happen is because, as we have seen, pigments are chemical components. Many of them are salts, and when we mix them, we give origin to a chemical solution. In this case, there is the chance, even if small, that some of them can chemically react, carrying out a third, totally different component, for example, a different type of salt, which has a completely different color from what we could expect. So, when we find a set of pigments that we like, and we know how they react when we use them, not only on the palette but also on the canvas, we should try to stick to them because this makes our life much easier. Of course, we can always try some new color, but try to not change completely your palette every time. My suggestion is to introduce one, maximum two new pigments per time. There are some colors that we always want to have on our palette, and we're gonna call them correctors. We will use them to change the lightness of the other colors while we paint. So, to clear up any pigment, we're going to use the white, eventually with a touch of yellow. But to darken them, we are going to use the bistro. We're not going to use the black because it tends to make the other colors dirty, while the bistro blends with them in a better way. The bistro is a dark brown tending to gray. Of course, it's a tertiary color. In this case, to make it, we have mixed some lemon yellow, some red vermilion, and some Prussian blue. But you can carry it out mixing other pigments. Sometimes we also have to add to our palette the black, because the bistro can darken colors only up to a certain point, but then, if we really need to go dark, we need to use the black. My suggestion is to only use it to make dark colors darker. At the end, preparing a palette takes time, but fortunately, we don't need to do it every time we start a new painting session. For example, if we get tired and we want to stop for that day, we don't have to clean everything up and redo everything again when we restart. We can cover our palette with some plastic wrap so that our oils won't get in contact with the oxygen, which is responsible for their polymerization. To do that, we're going to take a large piece of wrap and we're going to cover the whole palette. Then, using a clean brush, we're going to help the air getting out by pressing the plastic film against the palette and our oils. We're going to start pressing in the middle, and slowly we're going to move to the borders. Once we have finished, we can leave our palette there for a few days. If we want to use it, we just need to remove the plastic film and eventually add a few drops of medium to refresh the paints. With this last suggestion, we have concluded for now our discussion on the oil colors. If you enjoyed this video, we will really appreciate if you could click on like and subscribe to our channel. It will also help us very much if you could leave a comment. Thank you for watching this video and see you in the next one.